Hi guys, I'm back for another video. This is in regards to yo-yo fishing. What is yo-yo fishing? Well, yo-yo fishing is grabbing a jig that's anywhere between 4.5 ounces to maybe 7 ounces in weight and dropping it to the bottom of the ocean and bringing it back up as fast as possible. That's all it is. That's what yo-yo fishing is. Now, you can target bottom fish when you're yo-yoing, but of course if you're targeting bottom fish when you're yo-yoing, you're not going to retrieve the jig all the way up to the top of the boat. At best, you're going to crank your reel maybe 10 times and then you're going to release it, bring it back down to the rocks, crank it 5 times, release it, bring it back down to the bottom of the rocks. A lot of times you'll get bit while the jig is traveling down. So always be ready to set the drag. The moment you feel that bite, set the drag and crank, okay? It's that simple. Now, obviously, we're gonna talk about different things. Jigs, line, reels, rods. So, this is a popular 6X model. It's yellow-green, white-blue. This is their heavier model. And then you've got the smaller ones, which are the juniors. These are like 4 ounces, 4.5 ounces. These are a little smaller. They seem to work well too. And then you've got these like dart jigs. You get these at Walmart. They're like $9 and they seem to work extremely well. I actually like these more than, let's say, a Taddy 4.0 or a Salas. I feel like because the design on them has a tummy, it's harder for the jig to cut through the water and you get a little bit more tired. These are slim, as you can see, the profile. And these seem to cut through the water a lot easier. This one here is 4 ounces. Now, this purple silver seems to work extremely well for me. I've had a lot of luck. When all else fails with the jigs, this is what I hook up. Now, I like using on my setups these swivels. A lot of people seem to think that the jig won't swim well if you use a swivel, but if you use a swivel, you can switch your jigs whenever you want to try a different color without having to tie, cut anything. You just basically unsnap it and snap a new one, okay? Plus the swivel helps you so that your line doesn't twist, because this jig will spin, and if you don't have a swivel you can end up with a twisted line, okay? So that seems to be helpful. Let's say that there's yellowtail, okay? And the yellowtail are not at the bottom of the ocean, maybe they're halfway down. Don't send your jig all the way to the bottom of the ocean. Kind of know where the fish are at, either through whatever everyone else is doing on the boat. Check to see how far they're dropping their lure. If they're having success at 20 fathoms, 30 fathoms, and that's how far you need to send your jig, more or less, okay? So then you send it down to the bottom of the ocean, or not to the bottom, but towards the middle of the ocean, and you crank it up. You don't necessarily have to go all the way up to the top of the boat. Sometimes if you do that, what ends up happening is that you're not paying attention, and before you know it, this jig is at the top, and it ends up hitting your guide and damaging your guide. Also, one other important thing to remember is when you're reeling as fast as possible, aim your rod towards the bottom of the ocean. Don't do this, or it's going to create a bend on your rod and it's going to be a lot harder to set any kind of hook because your rod's already bent. So aim down, let the reel and the line do the work for you, okay? Now, I use braided line with a top shot of about 40 pounds, sometimes 50 pounds, depending on how big the fish are. Why do I use braided line? I feel that braided line gives me the sensitivity that I need to know where my lure is at. A lot of times when we're using mono, we send the lures down to the bottom of the ocean and there's so much stretch on that line that you can't even tell if the line already hit the bottom. I've seen a lot of new people struggle with that, and I always encourage braid for new people. What color braid do I encourage? I encourage white braid, but I use this green one because it's usually on sale versus the white line. I think everyone wants the white line. So a lot of times the white line is easier to see in the water than the green line. Not that the fish are gonna see it, but if you tangle up with somebody else on the boat, the deckhand's gonna have a harder time untangling your lines if you can't really see it. So the wider line seems to work out for some reason. So in a nutshell, that's what yo-yo fishing is. You need a high-speed reel. If you're gonna go with accurate, I recommend a 600 narrow model. You can get away with the 600. What's the difference between a narrow reel and a not narrow reel? Well, obviously one's narrow, but how does that help you? As you're retrieving the line, it's easier to spool it back in evenly versus one that's a little wider. That's gonna be harder for you to put the line back in. Okay, that's how that helps. Rods, this is a Penn Carnage. It's a jigging rod. It's a 6'6". Let's see, 6'6". Lure weight 4 to 7 ounces. And it says 50 to 100 pound braided line. So this seems to have some good bend on it, okay? Now, you don't want a rod that's too flimsy for yo-yoing, because let's say you send the jig down to the bottom of the ocean and for some reason there's a yellowtail down there by the rocks. The first instinct of a yellowtail or any bottom fish is to grab your lure and try and hide behind the rocks. If that happens, you're likely to get your line cut off because it's gonna get cut off on one of the rocks. So you need to have a little bit of power on that rod to get the fish out of there. As soon as they strike, immediately start turning that handle, get them off the rocks. You can ease up on them the moment you get them up off the floor, maybe about 30 feet. Once you do that, let them use the drag, you know. You don't want to muscle a fish in too hard because you're likely to rip the jig out of its mouth. Now, I am using braided line. There's no stretch when it comes to braided line, but because I'm using a mono top shot, it gives some sort of cushion when the fish starts pulling. If there's no cushion, again, you're likely to rip the jig off out of the fish's mouth. That wouldn't be good because you're gonna lose the fish and you might even rip your line and lose the jig, and each jig is about 13 bucks. So you don't even wanna go there. There's different types of jigs here. I've got a flat fall jig. This seems to be a popular color. Okay, this is not a yo-yo jig really. It's a flat fall jig by Shimano. This is 8 ounces. There's different sizes. Basically what you do is you drop this lure into the water and it starts to sink in this motion. And a lot of times you'll get bit on the fall. So what you can do if you're trying to target anything at the bottom of the ocean is drop it, it'll flutter down. Once it hits the bottom, crank it 3 times, put it back in free spool and it'll drop again. Crank it 5 times this time. Go up a little higher, let it fall a little bit more. Crank it 15 times. Let it come back all the way down. That way you're testing different heights and hopefully you get bit. Well, there's nothing much else left to say other than that's what yo-yo fishing is. There's different jigs. This is the Tatty 4.0 glow in the dark with an S. Seems to work very well when it comes to white sea bass for some odd reason. There's different colors. I think most importantly, when you go fishing and you don't know too much about yo-yo fishing, is look at the other guys. You know, they're not gonna get mad because you're looking and checking to see how things work. You know, a lot of times they don't mind and they'll give you some tips. This here, I use it for bottom fishing. This is a bomber jig, 6 ounce. What I do to this is I put a piece of squid on it, send it to the bottom of the ocean, and I basically, once it hits the bottom of the ocean, I crank it 3 times and then I start messing with it. Hoping to entice a bite, you know? The hairs, because of the current, will then start to move. And that might trigger a bite along with your little movement, okay? But keep these types of jigs in the strike zone. Don't go too high with it. You're probably not gonna get bit. This is mostly designed for bottom fishing. Okay, they seem to work very well. Like I said, they're bomber. You've got jig heads. You can basically do the same thing as the bomber. But here what I would do is either put a nice piece of fillet on it, you know, or a nice big whole squid, and I mess with this up and down at the bottom. Try and trigger a bite. A lot of times when the fish aren't hungry towards noon, you know, you can send your bait down there, and if you're just standing there bottom fishing, a lot of times they won't bite because they're just not hungry. So you kind of have to trigger the bite by moving the bait. Well, guys, I think we've basically covered a lot. I hope now you know what yo-yo fishing is and how it works. I wish you guys a lot of luck. Be patient. Tie some good knots. And don't be discouraged if you're not catching fish. You have to grind the whole time that you're there to try and take some fish home. A lot of times, I've caught my biggest fish when there's like 15 minutes left in the trip. So don't throw in the towel too soon. It ain't over till the fat lady sings. Best of luck. Thank you for watching.